Welcome to this conservation cropping seminar. I'm University of Illinois Extension's Todd Gleason, managing your inputs for healthy soils today. We would like to take time to thank our sponsors as well today. They include USDA NRCS, the Champaign County Soil and Water Conservation District, the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency, the Illinois Stewardship Alliance, the Illinois Sustainable Ag Partnership, the American Farmland Trust, the Association of Illinois Soil and Water Conservation Districts, Illinois Sea Grant, Illinois Extension, Pro Harvest Seeds, and the Illinois Department of Agriculture. We'll begin now with opening comments from Tom Beyers, who is the president of the Association of Illinois Soil and Water Conservation Districts. He was elected in July of 2020. He's also the chairman of the Marion County Soil and Water Conservation District and served as a director there since 2008. Tom and his wife live near Odin, Illinois. Together, they operate about 750 acres corn, soybean, beef cattle, and also a part-time conservation, excavation, and tiling service. Beyers has no-tilled since 2008, minimum tilled corn, cover cropped as well for the last 4 years with rye after corn and no-till soybeans into rye. And he has a passion for conservation. He's a participant in the Illinois Cover Crop Initiative and a participant of Saving Tomorrow's Agricultural Resources. That's the STAR Initiative. Thank you so much. We appreciate you being with us. Good morning to you, Tom.
Good morning, Todd. And as you'll quickly see, I'm not an experienced presenter, so my comments will be pretty brief, but I would like to again welcome everyone to the 8th Annual Conservation Cropping Seminars. I'd like to take this opportunity to reiterate thank you again to all the attendees and to the partners and sponsors that make these seminars happen. I see we got 161 participants. My recollection of past seminars, I rather doubt that the Mount Vernon seminar would have ever reached that kind of attendance. So that's great. I'd like to recognize a few instrumental people that through the years have made these cropping seminars happen. And I think they're in attendance, but Joe Bybee, Marty McManus, Elliot Legacy, and special thank you to Champaign County Soil and Water for stepping up and helping with this. This is an exciting time to be a conservation farmer or be a conservationist. A lot of discussions around conservation. Some of the newer programs that have occurred in the last couple of years. This is the second year for Illinois' cover crop discount program. When that was first introduced with potential $5 per acre discount to cover maybe 50,000 acres. I personally wondered if we would get enough applications for that to make good use of those state dollars. But we found out quite early that there was a lot of interest. And I think first year we had applications that would have probably doubled the amount of money had we been able to fund those. And they just recently have completed the application period for the second year of that. That program actually offers, if you're lucky enough to be awarded, a $5 discount on your federal crop insurance the following year. Another program I'd like to take the opportunity to make note of is the STAR program. Champaign County again was instrumental in initiating that program, which is a conservation scoring program by the fields, by individual fields, and that program has been growing leaps and bounds the last couple of years. So kudos goes out to that. And you see in the literature here that there's a small incentive program now attached to that. Previously, it was a free program, but it didn't have any money attached, but we're fortunate enough to have a little bit of incentive attached to that. And so I invite all to take a look at that program and give it consideration. As I said, exciting time for conservationists. If we're reading all the news, national and so forth, we're hearing, reading about carbon credits and the potential of carbon credit programs, and they're talking about putting money to that for us farmers. And I think that's probably a big potential for a big positive with the cover crop program. So timely on that. And with that, Todd, I think I'd like to close my comments. And again, thank you to everyone that has joined this seminar, and enjoy the conference.
Up next, the Peterson brothers are here. This is a video that the Peterson brothers from Kansas put together with us, for us, actually. You might be familiar with them. You've probably seen them on YouTube from time to time, and here they are. I'll let them introduce themselves. The Peterson brothers.
Hey everyone, I'm Greg.
I'm Nathan.
And I'm Kendall.
Welcome to the Cover Cropping Systems Seminar. We hope you guys are excited for what you're about to learn and go through. We're going to give a little introduction to who we are and some of the things that we've done and why we're passionate about soil health and cover crops. We're three brothers that farm together in central Kansas, and we also make YouTube videos and different online content to promote agriculture, not only from an entertainment side of things, but also from an educational side of things. We got started back in 2012 with our first video, I'm Farming and I Grow It. And that video was a parody of a popular song that we took and changed the lyrics to and posted. And that video got 5 million views in a week. And we've since done 20 music videos about farming that we now have a combined view count on Facebook and YouTube of about 150 million views. If you'd have told us 8 years ago that that was even possible, we wouldn't have believed you. But we're really thankful for the exposure that those videos have brought farming and agriculture, and hopefully people have learned some from our videos as well.
We farm together as the 5th generation of our family farm, and it's a pretty typical Kansas farm. We grow cattle and wheat, corn, soybeans, grain sorghum or milo, and yes, lots of forages and cover crops. And so we're always looking to learn more about farming as well as show it to other people.
So we all three actually graduated from Kansas State University. Greg majored in ag communications, Nathan majored in ag technology management, and I majored in ag econ. So we all three are kind of trying to take over different parts of the operation. There's a lot more people involved now than there was in 2012 when we first got started doing the videos. We actually were all three still in school then. So a lot of things have changed as Greg got married to his wife, Bricanna. Nathan got married to his wife, Riley, and I'm married to my wife, Kaylin. And our sister, who's currently in college, she helps out seasonally on the farm as well as our mom. And then our dad, and that rounds out the workforce here on Peterson Farm. And so we've learned a lot since 2012. Our farm has changed a lot, we hope in good ways. And with that, we've hopefully improved the soil and our livestock management, and pretty much every part of the farm we try to improve, and we have goals to hit those each year.
And Kendall just had a baby this past year, and then
Yep.
Nathan and Riley are expecting, and Bricanna and I are expecting. So lots of exciting changes coming to our family and our farm. And so just real quick, we wanted to talk a little bit about why we implement cover crops on our farm and why soil health is important to us. We have been a no-till farming operation since about the year 2000 is when we kind of got started with that. And our dad has always really believed in that system. And we farm in the hills of Kansas, or at least we think they're hills. And we think as far as the hills go, no-till is a great system, and then cover crops is kind of brings another layer of that to our operation. And so after making YouTube videos and having people ask questions about those, I think we all three have become a little more well-versed in kind of what all cover cropping and no-till and soil health entails. And we're going to perform a video at the end of our talk here that we actually made kind of dedicated to soil health. And so that explains a lot of my passion about soil health, having written those lyrics. But I think it's really important to be good stewards of the land and to keep soil from blowing or running off the field, and then it improves your bottom line as well.
Yeah, I actually minored in agronomy while I was at Kansas State, and so that was kind of where I first heard of cover crops and things like that, and it made me really excited because we have the cattle side and cropping side, and we do struggle with both erosion when we have too much rain and wind erosion when it's too dry. And then we are always having either too much rain or not enough. And if you do cover cropping right, it can be a challenge. Here we're usually short on rain rather than too much, but it can go either way. But it's a fun challenge to try to use cover crops to help balance out your moisture and save the water when you get too much of it, and conserve it for when it's dry. So that's what I like about them.
And there's a lot of different variables with our crop rotation here in Kansas, especially when we integrate both the cow-calf herd and grazing stocker cattle. And so in between, whether we're grazing crop residues or cover crops, there's a lot of value in getting livestock out on the land, and we can see that in our the health of our soils. And we do testing before and after just to see organic matter, if we can raise that a full percent, and just getting the manure spread out on the field, there's benefit to that too. And so everything kind of works together in our operation, and then hopefully it makes the beef side more profitable and the cropping side more profitable.
Yeah, so we hope you guys have a great seminar, and we hope that this has been a good welcome message for you guys. We love talking about this kind of stuff, and we might even follow along with the seminar. But we're going to close our opening here with a parody song that we wrote and filmed that's called Residue, and it's a parody of Shape of You by Ed Sheeran. And so I hope you guys enjoy this. We're going to try to perform it down here with the phone speaker setup, and so I hope you guys can hear all right, and hope you enjoy. The city isn't the best place for me to be, and so the field is where I go. Me and my family on the farm, planting crops, working fast, and then we plant slow. And some of the farmers work the soil till it's bad, but trust me, give this a chance. Now take a ride out to our farm that we're surveying right before we start to plant. Now I'm singing like,
soil, I know you need good health. That's why I take the soil test to the lab. Come on now, what do you need? SCANG.
Say soil, got to protect you from all the rain, wind, and compaction too. That is why I love these roots. That is why I love these roots.
I'm in love with the residue that I pull my planter through. Although tilling is kind of fun too. I'm in love with the cover. Last night I was in the field, planting clover and radishes too. Every day discovering something brand new. I'm in love with the cover. Oh why, oh why, oh why, oh why. I'm in love with the cover. Oh why, oh why, oh why, oh why. I'm in love with the cover. Oh why, oh why, oh why, oh why. I'm in love with the cover. Every day discovering something brand new. I'm in love with the residue. One weekend we let the story begin. It sprouted and there's a big rain. Residues, it keeps the soil from shifting off the field like a runaway train. It's hot for hours and hours, but we don't even have to scour, cause our moisture is doing okay. When harvest comes from accident, it's far less taxing than working up the soil all day. Now I'm singing like,
soil, I know you need good health. That's why I keep the soil structure intact. Come on now, what do you need? Aggregates and microbe activity.
Say soil, got to protect you from all the rain, wind, and compaction too. That is why I love these roots. That is why I love these roots.
I'm in love with the residue that I pull my cedar through. Although tilling is kind of fun too. I'm in love with the cover. Last night I was in the field, planting clover and radishes too. Every day discovering something brand new. I'm in love with the cover. Oh why, oh why, oh why, oh why. I'm in love with the cover. Why, oh, why, oh, why, oh, why? I'm in love with the cover. Why, oh, why, oh, why, oh, why? I'm in love with the cover. Every day discovering something brand new. I'm in love with the residue. Enjoy the conference, everyone.
Well, our thanks go to the Peterson brothers, of course. If you'd like to find more from them, they have a whole bunch of videos that are up on YouTube. You can just go to youtube.com and search for them at Peterson Brothers. Look them up. They're great for agriculture, and they do a whole bunch of parodies that I think you will appreciate. Let's continue now on with our conversation. Again, remember, if you have questions, the best time to get them asked is right now, meaning just when you have the question, put it in the chat box. We'll see it. And as we go through the morning, we'll get those questions answered. Joel Gruver is here. He's an associate professor in the School of Agriculture at Western Illinois University, where he teaches soil science and conservation classes and conducts research and outreach related to cover crops, soil health, and organic cropping systems. Dr. Gruver, thank you so much for being with us this morning. I know that you're probably not looking any more forward to the winter weather that is headed our way and the very cold temperatures that I am, but we do appreciate you on this. What will be, I think, a gray day eventually here, but looking forward to having you make a presentation. Good morning to you.
I am very happy to be here. We're going to talk about managing for the double bottom line, soil health and profitability. My guess is that since you are on this call, you probably are familiar with at least a few of these guys. These are some soil health evangelists: Alan Williams, Gabe Brown, Ray Archuleta, Dave Brandt. And they're some pretty unique characters. They're pretty hard to replicate. And I say that with all respect, but sometimes you hear these guys, you get inspired, you get all excited, and then you think, you know, I can't do that. Well, there are people in Illinois that are also soil health innovators. We have some great profiles here on the NRCS, the Illinois NRCS website, 14 profiles. Perhaps you're up there. The reality is that there are many other soil health innovators in Illinois. The people that really are into soil health right now, I would say, maybe fit over on the left side of this spectrum. The current soil health enthusiasts are the true innovators, but also early adopters, maybe the early majority. But we need to keep moving. Our industry needs to have soil health as part of the mainstream paradigm. An industry has not really changed until a new paradigm is adopted by the middle of the industry. Maybe there will be some folks on the right that never get into soil health, but I hope that I present a compelling argument today that shows that we can bring the middle into the soil health focus that right now may be more on the left. Now, how are we going to get there? Regulations can drive change. If you take a look at some of these quotes, there are various people that feel strongly that the volunteer approach isn't going to cut it, that we need regulations if we're going to address some of our water quality and other types of pollution issues. I think if we look at the history of agriculture and the history of any type of production industry, we'll see that sometimes regulation does play a positive role, does move us forward. But rarely does regulation maximize innovation. I want to talk about a different way that we can achieve the innovation that we need in this industry. The Illinois Nutrient Loss Reduction Strategy was launched about 5 years ago. It established interim and long-term goals, and goals are a different approach than just regulation. Now, these goals are very serious. We'll talk about them more in just a second. And we need to think carefully about whether we are up to this task, but I think we are. Some good news first. The Illinois nutrient loss reduction strategy identified various sources of the excess nutrients, and point sources, of course, were one of those sources, and major reductions have already been achieved. By 2025, we were hoping to achieve 15% reduction, and we actually have already achieved about 14%. That's with nitrogen, nitrate nitrogen. With phosphorus, we were hoping to achieve 25%, and we've already reduced about 22%. One key thing to understand here, though, is that we're talking about primarily sewage treatment plants. Reducing nutrient losses from sewage treatment plants is very expensive. New technology adds a lot of cost. The more challenging issue is the diffuse nutrient pollution, or sometimes called non-point source pollution. I want to introduce a term here. You may be familiar with this term, but I think it's an important concept as we think about how to tackle challenges, as complex as diffuse nutrient pollution. This article, this 2020 article, refers to diffuse nutrient pollution as a wicked problem. What is a wicked problem? Well, wicked problems have some common characteristics. These are problems that are never completely solved. The solutions are not right or wrong, but sometimes just better or worse. It's very difficult to define the problem. There are multiple causes. There are multiple stakeholders with conflicting agendas. Rather than go through all 10 of these, let's simplify this a little bit. Here's another definition of wicked problems. They are difficult or nearly impossible to solve because of incomplete or contradictory knowledge, the number of people and opinions involved, and the interconnected nature of each problem with other problems. And while that number 3 may be part of the challenge, I think it is also an opportunity. Because the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico, as well as all the local nutrient pollution issues, those are wicked problems. And they are connected to another wicked problem, which is soil degradation, or basically how do we mainstream the concept of soil health. These are both wicked problems and they are interconnected. And if we tackle both of them, or I guess I should say, if we understand how tackling one impacts the other, we can actually make progress in solving these wicked problems. Let's just go through a little bit of background on just what we're trying to tackle here. We're trying to reduce losses of nitrogen and phosphorus, and we have a major responsibility here in Illinois. Illinois is the #1 source of nitrogen and phosphorus, making it down to the Gulf of Mexico. Lots of studies have, investigated where the nutrients are coming from. Illinois is far from the only source, but you can see that Illinois is one of the primary sources for both nitrogen and phosphorus. And agriculture, of course, is not the only source in Illinois, but agriculture is a primary source. For nitrogen, we're talking about approximately 80%. For phosphorus, only about half. The way the strategy was set up, there are baseline levels that are the standard that we're trying to reduce from. And so our goal is by 2025 to get a 15% reduction of nitrate nitrogen from the 1980 to 1996 baseline. You can see there are about 400 million pounds of nitrate nitrogen per year, and a 25% reduction in phosphorus. So you can see at the bottom where we're trying to get in just 4 more years. And then in another 10 years, we're trying to reduce all the way down to 45% less of both nitrate nitrogen and phosphorus. So how are we doing? Well, every 2 years, as part of the nutrient loss reduction strategy, every 2 years, a biennial assessment comes out. And so we will have a new one this year, but the last one in 2019 said that both nitrogen and phosphorus, rather than decreasing, have actually increased. You can see there on the right, the change from baseline is actually plus 7%. for nitrate nitrogen and plus 26% for total phosphorus. That's a little discouraging. Well, maybe that's just because we're adding up the entire state and we, have a few hot spots. The reality is that, yes, we do have hot spots, but we have lots of them. And when the Illinois Nutrient Loss Reduction Strategy incentivized individual farming groups to do tile water monitoring, some of those hotspots were identified. This is some data that I was involved with collecting. And so basically we had some of the more conservation-oriented farmers in a county collecting tile water, and we had it analyzed actually for nitrate nitrogen as well as phosphorus. And you can see how the data changed over time. These were the conservation farmers. And what we're seeing here is that essentially all of the tile water levels were above 10 parts per million, the EPA drinking water standard, and many of them were above 20 parts per million, which is what is often stated to be the level that we can achieve with BMPs. I'll say one more time, these were the conservation farmers. They were using BMPs. So this just shows you how challenging a problem this is. Now, one of the biggest drivers of the higher levels in recent years is probably not what is being done specifically in terms of farm management, but rather the weather. We've had more intense precipitation. That may be driving the higher nutrient losses. But that's not something we can control. That is something that may actually become more challenging. Another challenge that we need to think about is what has been revealed by the Illinois Conservation Transect Survey. You can see that basically about every other year, there are lots of field sites that are evaluated for the information needed to run the universal soil loss equation. And they basically predict how much soil loss would occur at many different locations, hundreds of locations per county. And then over, you can see right in the center of this slide, they're predicting how much is less than T. And then they also calculate 1 to 2T and even greater than 2T. Well, what do we mean by T? Well, a little bit of review if you haven't taken a soil and water conservation class recently. T is a number that's basically a target, approximately 5 tons of sediment loss per acre. The specific letter T refers to the idea of this being a tolerable soil loss. I think that's a questionable concept. 5 tons of soil loss per acre is actually quite a bit, and I think we can do much better than that. But the point is that if we take a look over time and see how we're doing, we actually see that the best values, when we had the highest percentage less than T and the lowest amounts in the 1 to 2 or greater than 2, that was a long time ago, more than 20 years ago. And if we take a look at where the worst values are, those were actually quite recent. That's concerning. What is going on? I mean, I really don't think we could say the Illinois farmers are becoming less interested in conservation. So what's going on? Well, one of the issues is that we've been growing more corn. This shows that there's been a kind of a separation between the corn and soybean acres. Now, obviously, they've kind of come back together recently. What caused that separation? Well, ethanol. There was more demand for corn. And I don't mean in any way to critique ethanol. Ethanol, I think, plays a very valuable role in our industry, but this is a wicked problem because there are many complications that are driving things in different directions. When we had the ethanol boom, we had a period with higher margins. Farmers were making more money. And then, as seems to always be the case, after a shorter period of high margins, we tend to have a longer period of low margins. But this also is a challenge. It means that farmers don't have as much money to spend on conservation or other practices. They have to tighten the belt. When they had more money coming in, they bought more large tractors. They also spent more money on tile. They had more money to spend for a few years. And so obviously farmers like to spend that money on developing the farm rather than paying taxes. When they had more tillage tools and bigger horsepower and also wet falls and springs, there were a lot of farmers that felt they needed to do more tillage. And so that's part of what drove the trends, the concerning trends in the Illinois Conservation Transect survey data. Okay, enough concerns, I guess. Let's see if we can figure out how we're going to turn this around. One of the very positive developments that has come out of the Illinois nutrient loss reduction strategy is a huge mobilization of the whole industry, whether we're talking about the Illinois Chemical and Fertilizer Association, the Farm Bureau, the commodity groups. There has been a mobilization of communication about these issues. How are we going to tackle these issues front and center? And so there have been a huge number of presentations. These are just some numbers to give you an idea. We're talking about around 1,000 presentations over the last 5 years, and just in 2017 to 18, over 80,000 people attended these events. Just for some perspective, we have around 70,000 farmers in Illinois, so this was a lot of attendance. Well, so how did all these presentations impact awareness, impact farmer activities? Well, we have a little window into this. The Illinois Nutrient Loss Reduction Strategy included a series of surveys conducted by NASS, and here we have a little bit of data. This is released in 2020, so we're talking 5 years in, after many hundreds of presentations, hundreds of thousands of people attending these presentations. We still had actually more than half of the farmers that answered these survey questions indicated that they were only slightly knowledgeable or not knowledgeable at all about the nutrient loss reduction strategy, about the MRTN concept, about bioreactors, about constructed wetlands. That's a little bit concerning. More than half said that they were slightly knowledgeable or not knowledgeable at all. One positive piece here is that more than half said they were somewhat or knowledgeable or very knowledgeable about cover crops. Here we have just a little more data to get a sense of where we are at. In 2017 and 2019, we had about a third of Illinois farmers that responded to this survey. And so we're talking about between 1,000 and 2,000 farmers each time the survey was done. About a third were using the MRTN nitrogen rate. What we're going through here are practices recommended within the nutrient loss reduction strategy. A significantly lower fraction, about half as many, were putting on less than half of their nitrogen in the fall with the rest split in the spring. So that's a little concerning that those numbers are that low. In terms of cover crops, the total acres are pretty low, but we do see a trend towards some progress with significantly more cover crops going in on tiled fields in 2019 as compared to 2017. Not too much change on the non-tiled fields. But when you consider that the nutrient loss reduction strategy recommends that all tiled fields have cover crops, we have a long way to go. So how about private industry? How is industry driving us forward in this? Well, there's the 4R stewardship concept, the idea that we need to get fertilizer management right, with the right source, the right rate, the right time, the right placement. A big push started even before the Illinois Nutrient Loss Reduction Strategy back in 2012. And a very interesting piece of the national 4R stewardship program is something called the 4R Advocate program. I'm hoping that some of you are familiar with this, but I'll introduce you if you are not. The basic idea is that this is a program that recognizes not just farmers that are doing the right thing, but rather farmer service provider pairs or teams are recognized. And so I think that this is something that is particularly valuable in terms of thinking about how we move these concepts into the mainstream. We need to recognize that this relationship between farmers and service providers is the backbone of mainstream agriculture, and it's also where we are going to make the most progress in terms of improving our nutrient management. We have had actually now 9 Illinois teams honored. So 9 Illinois farmers and their service provider. And I have been blessed to interact with some of these farmers. I've had them come in and speak to my nutrient management class. So you can see here, we had a young woman who went out of state to go to college, but then she came back to take over the family farm and pair up with a WIU alum, Kyle Lake, who is her service provider. And so it was a great opportunity to we actually had Maria Cox, the young farmer, come speak to my class, and then we had Kyle Lake and his younger brother come speak to the nutrient management class. And it was very obvious that while there was a focus on 4 R's, that is managing fertilizer right, that Maria Cox and her family are doing a lot more than just focusing on managing nutrients. Same thing with the Gancho family. Michael has come down and spoken to my nutrient management class several times, two times actually, and I hope we'll be able to get him to come this year as well. And they are doing so much more than just the 4 R's. They're doing the R's right. That is right source, right rate, right timing, right placement, but they are also doing long-term no-till, cover crops. They even have a bioreactor on the Ganchow farm. So hopefully it's clear. I think that the 4 R's are important, but the 4 R's are just one piece of a larger approach. I was trying to find this article last night and I didn't actually find it, so I don't have the source up here, but I'll provide this to anyone who's interested. This is a great article discussing how many other things we need to get right. In addition to getting the right source, rate, placement, and timing, we need to think about the right combinations, the right, well, I won't read through all of these, but I think that the point is pretty clear that there are many things that successful farmers get right beyond just fine-tuning their fertilizer. Okay, so is this going to solve the nutrient loss issues, just getting the fertilizer practices right? Unfortunately, all the evidence suggests that 4R practices, while they are appealing to farmers, while they have the potential for low cost or even profit potential per unit of nutrient removed, they actually don't have a lot of potential to reduce nutrient losses, especially with nitrogen. We simply aren't going to reduce the amount of nitrogen we need through fine-tuning our nitrogen management. Phosphorus, we can get a little more done with 4Rs, but still it's a small part of the bigger picture. But I'll just say one more time, the strength of the 4Rs is that they are often low cost per unit of nutrient removed. And in some cases, they even have positive potential, profit potential, because they are enabling us to reduce our costs enough or increase our yields enough that we actually are making more money. Cover crops have far more potential than the 4Rs to reduce both nitrogen and phosphorus losses. But most of the models, including the original Illinois Nutrient Loss Reduction Strategy model and the Iowa model and several other models that I've looked at, they mostly show that cover crops are pretty expensive, meaning per pound of nutrient removed, that it entails a significant cost. So we can get a lot done. We can remove a lot of nutrients effectively with cover crops, but the way the models show it, there's a lot of cost. So I want to boil this down, this wicked problem that I've shown you many different facets of. I think if we want to really understand what our biggest challenge is, it's to figure out how we can make cover crops more profitable. We know that they work. We also know that they can have a high cost. We need to show that they also can have a low cost or even be profitable. Because while we, when we make cover crops profitable, we will take care of both nutrient losses and soil health at the same time. There's been some great work on how to reduce cover crop costs and even make them profitable by the Practical Farmers of Iowa. I won't read through all of these, but I will emphasize a few of them that I think are maybe particularly important. But here you can see a list of 7 different strategies for making cover crops pay. There's no question the number one way, the easiest way to make cover crops pay is to have cover crops become feed for grazing animals, cheaper than stored feed. There's no question about that. Lots of case studies have been put together showing this. And when we graze cover crops, we tend to enhance the soil health benefits as well as increase the yields of the following crop. 2 other pieces of the 7 mentioned by PFI are avoiding cover crop establishment failure and reducing redundant costs. There are many ways to tackle both of those, but I think what I'm showing here on this slide is maybe a very simple approach that is probably broadly applicable across many farms in Illinois. The vertical tillage approach, where either you are synchronously putting out the seed and running your vertical tillage tool, or perhaps broadcasting your cover crop seed, maybe mixed with fertilizer, and then running over with a vertical tillage tool. You are accomplishing multiple tasks at the same time. It has a high level of success. Basically, you are pretty close to the success rate that you would achieve with a drill, but you are doing it at less cost, you're doing it more rapidly, and you're achieving more things at the same time. Another very important piece of this is avoiding corn yield drag. Typically, or frequently, we are going into corn following soybeans where we have limited soybean residue, we have a more erodible situation, and we need to think about how we can fit cover crops into that situation, but do it in a way that avoids corn yield drag. Practical Farmers of Iowa have put together a great bulletin here. It's all very tried, tested information from their farmer collaborators, and it's written in a very accessible way. But let's focus in on a few specific pieces of this. Also in Iowa, they have the Iowa Soybean Association's on-farm network, recently changed to their research for innovation farm just in the last year, but the network is still active, just under a new name, and you can access a large amount of data from all of their trials, including their cover crop trials. What you can see is that there are very, very few cases where cover crops preceding soybeans resulted in a yield loss. There are a significant number of cases where corn following cover crops resulted in a large yield loss. Why is that? Well, there are 2 main reasons. Both of them, I think, are manageable. When cover crops precede corn, we often have nitrogen immobilization and we can have root pathogen problems. Both of these things, if we recognize them, we can manage for them. But if we don't manage for them, we can end up with significant yield loss when corn follows cover crops. One interesting thing is that when I talked to Scott Nelson who's the director of research for the Iowa Soybean Association, he told me that actually the largest yield losses where corn followed cover crops were actually all the first year. So these were multiple year studies, and essentially the farmers learned how to manage cover crops ahead of both corn and beans. And so the largest yield losses were all the first year. When they got a little more experience, they actually were able to minimize the yield losses for corn following cover crops. We're going to go through some information specifically from Scott Nelson with the Iowa Soybean Association that I think is excellent, very farmer accessible information that really delves in on one of the most critical issues to make corn following cover crops work. We've got to get the nitrogen form and placement right to make corn following cover crops work. It simply has to be a different strategy than when we don't have cover crops or when we are doing more tillage. A couple different issues involved. Scott shows really clearly here the difference between tilled and no-till in terms of urea nitrogen losses. Basically, there are much higher levels of the urease enzyme when you have a lot of residue. That urease enzyme takes urea, splits it into CO2 and ammonia, and you lose the ammonia. So if you are applying urea nitrogen, whether that be granular urea or UAN solution directly on a high residue surface, you are likely to lose a lot of ammonia, as you can see here. Another very important issue is that cover crops tend to sequester significant nitrate. They draw down soil nitrate levels early in the growing season when we have the yield forming stages of our corn. And when our corn is going through its early yield forming stages, we are seeing low nitrate levels, which basically is telling the corn plant that it doesn't need to develop much potential for yield, which is almost a guarantee that you're going to lose yield. The form of nitrogen also matters. So it's not just that you can lose urea. What is evident when you look at studies comparing different forms of nitrogen in no-till and cover crop situations, it seems evident that we both need to protect the nitrogen, the urea nitrogen, but we also need to look for opportunities to have more nitrate in the program. This is just kind of a big picture way to think about this, but I think it just helps drive home the key point here. Cereal cover crops like cereal rye are excellent nitrogen scavengers, but there is no question they promote nitrogen immobilization. That's what their scavenging is doing. It's converting available nitrogen into unavailable nitrogen. So we need to adjust our nitrogen management for corn whenever we have cover crops preceding. There are various ways we can make these adjustments. It doesn't just have to be with nitrogen fertilizer. We can also change our cover crop program. If we add in legumes or brassicas, create mixes, we can increase nitrogen availability. But when we have cereal rye as the cover crop or other cereal grain cover crops, we are consistently going to have immobilization that we have to address. Otherwise, we will see yield loss. We have a brand new tool available actually in Illinois, the cover crop analyzer. And I have just a little bit of experience looking at this, but one of the key aspects of this tool is that it does help us to model things like carbon nitrogen ratio in our cover crop biomass. And the higher the CN ratio, basically the more immobilization. So this is a way to kind of fine tune our understanding of what happens to our cover crop biomass over time and when it's going to be most problematic for tying up nitrogen. I want to show a little bit of specific data from a study just last year where Scott Nelson in Iowa was looking at how to address planting into larger cereal rye while it was still green and actually ending up with a yield gain rather than a yield hit. So he was planting corn into this cereal rye that we see here. And what we can see is that there were overall some very good yields. But there were 3 treatments that had substantially lower yields, and then 4 treatments that did significantly better. The top yielding system, you can see there about 240 was the average, 240 bushels per acre, received starter nitrogen 2 by 2. But let's look at the full set of treatments. Treatments 1 through 3, they put on the same amount of nitrogen as the other treatments, but they didn't put on any nitrogen with a specific goal of making high availability early to the seedlings. So they provided fall anhydrous with or without cover crop. They provided spring anhydrous with a cover crop. But in those 3 situations, while they put out a full nitrogen program, they did not address the early availability of nitrogen. The other 5 systems all had different ways of providing that early nitrogen. So that was a small plot study. They also did on-farm trials, and here we can see some evidence where they were planting corn into cover crops with early applied nitrogen, and they looked at with and without the cover crop, and consistently in this trial they picked up yield where they actually had the cover crop as compared to without the cover crop. And key thing to understand is it was very dry in Iowa, in the region of Iowa where this work was done last year. And so, as we'll get to in just a few minutes, cover crops can do really great things in terms of improving our management of water. Obviously, cover crops can use up water, but when managed properly, cover crops can help us capture water and retain water. And I think that's really when we take away the problem with the early applied or the early available N, we are able to have higher yields of corn following cover crops because of the better water availability. So just to kind of summarize our key concept here, when we're planting corn into cover crops, we need to make sure that we have 30 to 50% of the total N at or soon after planting, so that we have that early available N that basically addresses the immobilization issue. And we want to prioritize nitrate nitrogen. The nitrate nitrogen is going to be immediately available for uptake. And I won't read through all of these, but these are some specific methods that Scott Nelson recommended for providing that early available N. Obviously, it can be done with a standard 2 by 2 program, but it also could be a broadcast type of program. The key thing is that just spraying on UAN solution without any type of inhibitor tends to be much less effective because you lose a lot of the urea nitrogen. One last thing from Scott Nelson's work last year in Iowa, the situation with poorly drained soils is that you tend to see the biggest benefit when corn is following cover crops. You see the biggest benefit if you have a strip till system that does move some of that residue out of the row. Let's address another issue. So we've been talking about how to address the early available nitrogen. Another key issue here is seedling disease. The evidence is pretty strong. When conditions are cold and wet, cereal rye sets up corn seedlings for disease, especially Pythium. But when we understand this, obviously there are 2 things we can try to address. We can manage for warmer conditions, such as using strip till, letting the cover crop continue to grow so that it's pulling more moisture out, keeps the soil warmer and drier, and then also using appropriate fungicides. When we understand specifically what the pathogen, what our adversary is that we're trying to tackle here, we can use active ingredients like metalaxyl that are effective at controlling those pathogens. And that can help, just like managing the early nitrogen availability, we can manage the disease potential. Another interesting possibility is shown here. This is work being done by Shalimar Armstrong and others at Purdue, and they are doing what they call precision planted cover crops. They're basically using a 7.5-inch drill, but they're skipping 2 rows. So planting 2, skipping 2, planting 2, and they are creating a zone for planting the corn where there is no cover crop and the soil warms up faster, there's less nitrogen immobilization, and basically they're able to use half as much seed, so reduce their seed costs, reduce some of the risk factors, and most interesting, they have found in their early work that they are able to actually grow as much cereal rye biomass and immobilize as much or capture as much of the soil nitrate that otherwise would be lost over the winter. So they're able to get as much work done with half as much seed and potentially significantly reducing some of the risk factors. Okay, so we've gone through kind of some key components of making cover crops less risky, making cover crops actually contribute to positive effects on crop yield. More important than these individual components is looking at how the entire system is working on successful farms. So there are some great examples in the Midwest, including in Illinois, but I'm going to give you 2 specific examples actually just outside of Illinois, in Iowa and Indiana. The Burger Farm has been doing long-term conservation, more than 40 years of no-till and about 20 years of cover crops. They have figured out very specific things that they need to do to make basically their entire farm get planted to cover crops, all of their corn and soybeans planted into green cover crops most of the time now, and still have excellent stands and high yield potential. Many of these things they need to do involve improving their planter performance and then also improving the delivery of nutrients. They focus on delivering nutrients in the fall to promote cover crop growth and lowering the CN ratio of the cover crop residues. They also focus on while Steve is planting his corn, he's delivering a low rate of in-furrow fertility with an insecticide, as well as he's delivering UAN split on either side of the row. And this is a consistent program for him that he has really fine-tuned, and he's also been very forthcoming about it. So there's lots of information available if you are interested in looking at an entire system. Steve Berger's system is well covered on the internet. For example, this is a slide from a specific presentation available online where he describes his key 4 things that he focuses on to grow high yield corn following cover crops. He's essentially using cereal rye as his only cover crop, and he's almost always planting green now. So when you look at the specific details, he's fine-tuning his planter setup. He's making sure that he has plenty of nitrogen available through multiple applications, fall and spring. And he's making sure he has that available nitrogen early in the corn growth stage. He's managing for insects, and he is, in terms of timing, there's several things he is focusing on. He's getting his corn planted earlier than if he didn't have the cover crops, because his soil is actually drying out and warming up with the active growth of the cover crop. And in most cases now he's planting green, so he's allowing the cover crop to grow longer, and so he's actually maximizing the biomass and the benefits from the cover crop. One other quick example of a farmer or really a team of farmers, the Rulons. Rodney is over on the left, but it's a whole family effort. They have a large complex operation in Indiana, and they have really focused on making cover crops work, but also documenting the economic effects of cover crops. I won't read through all of this, but I encourage you, if you want to take a look at how a farmer has detailed specific economic impacts of cover crops. So some of these things may be, may be higher than is really true, but I think the overall effect is there are 6 different ways that they feel that they are economically gaining from cover crops, and they document it quite well. And so it's an interesting presentation to look at. One of the key things that they are doing a great job of documenting is increases in soil carbon on their fields. They're doing high resolution soil mapping, and they are showing over years, over time, that their soil organic matter levels, with consistent soil sampling, their soil organic matter levels are increasing over time where they have cover crops. This is something that other farmers are also documenting. This is another farmer in Indiana. They're doing point sampling, so they come back to the exact same place, GPS points. They're sampling to the same depth, and they are consistently seeing here that you can look from 2013 to 16 to 19, the organic matter levels are increasing across the fields. There are some places where the increases are small, but on average across their fields, they're seeing organic matter levels increase where they had cover crops. Taking this back to a research station, some great work has been done in Illinois. Ken Olson and others had a long-term study down in Southern Illinois where they were looking at 3 different tillage systems, and they did something that's really important. They carefully analyzed the soil organic carbon levels before they before they implemented the treatments. And then after the long-term treatments, they were actually able to clearly validate that cover crops resulted in increased carbon, not just at the surface, but in the topsoil and the subsoil in all 3 treatments, in the no-till, the chisel plow, and the mobile plow. They had the biggest increases in the no-till system, but they actually, where they added the cover crops, they had significant increases for the chisel plow and the mobile plow as well. Which means that we have the potential, and obviously this is all potential right now, but we have the potential for significant payoffs for farmers that are building this carbon, that are capturing CO2 and putting it back in their soil. And there are many different opportunities that are developing, from NORI to Indigo to the Soil and Water Outcomes Fund, and perhaps the best opportunity of all, this is the one that the Illinois corn growers are especially excited about, the Ecosystem Services Market Consortium. This is big money. This is money that I think we can pretty much guarantee is going to come into agriculture, and the question is how farmers will position themselves to access this money. And if you are interested, I think this will be a great opportunity. Coming up next week, February 12th, there will be a basically a collection of representatives from these 4 different carbon markets, and they all will have to answer questions. They will give a short presentation, but then they will take questions from the audience, and they will have to basically explain some of the things that cause farmers concern about this. Farmers are concerned about accountability. Farmers are concerned about whether they might have to pay money back if they change their practices. And so this will be an opportunity for farmers to ask those types of questions. I think if we really want to look at a great program in Illinois that already is making a difference in terms of farmers understanding not just the innovators that are doing things because innovators always are out front. This is a program that is a mix of farmers working with the precision conservation specialists to look at the overall conservation effects as well as economic effects of their farming programs. And this is the Precision Conservation Management, PCM program, organized by the Illinois corn growers, but lots of other partners as well. It's in 16 counties now, as well as a few counties in Kentucky. Over 300 farmers, 6,000 fields, and they now have over 5 years of data. Obviously, the data is most important to the individual farmers, so they can look at how they are performing economically and conservation-wise, but it also is an opportunity for benchmarking. The individual farmers get to compare how they're doing with other farmers. They also are putting together publications like this so the rest of us can take a look at kind of what the aggregate story is. We can look at which practices are proving to be most profitable across all the participants. We can look at a little bit of information on cover crops, because that is one of the things that the farmers are starting to analyze, to add in and analyze, but there's not too much data yet in the PCM data that's been made publicly available. But one thing that's really clear, the farmers that are making the most money with their corn programs are the farmers that have the best nitrogen use efficiency. They, as you can see in the bottom left here, they are ranking programs in terms of how much nitrogen per bushel of corn, and consistently the most profitable programs are the ones that have the lowest pounds of N per bushels of corn. But I think what makes this program most effective is not all the specific details of the program, but the trusted relationship between farmers and the PCM specialists that are helping them to collect the data, enter the data into good software, and then to interpret the data, to guide their future management based on what they're seeing as the economic and environmental consequences of their practices. It's also a great program in terms of just how many players are involved. This is I think a unique example of a truly diverse, integrated partnership. Now I want to switch gears a little bit and kind of figure out how we can wrap this all up and understand how tackling soil health and tackling nutrients work together to solve two different wicked problems, but solve them basically collectively. I don't know if you've ever heard this before, but I remember going to a presentation and hearing somebody say, nutrient losses are fundamentally a hydrology problem. That has just kind of echoed in my mind, and I've thought about that for years now. How do we address nutrient loss as a hydrology problem? Well, we need to more effectively capture summer precipitation. We need to have our roots effectively use a larger volume of soil. And I guess fundamentally, the way we make this an approach that doesn't just do more for growing our crops, but also helps reduce nutrient losses, we need to have more upward movement of water. Let's think about how we do this. First of all, we need to repair the hydrologic function in our fields. We know that with the more intense rainfall events we've been getting, that we are having more water run off. But we can do things about that. Obviously, tile, our drainage practices are part of this, but that's not the whole story. Cover crops play a critical role in repairing hydrologic function, partly by protecting the soil surface, but maybe even more important, by reconnecting the topsoil and the subsoil. This is a key part of the soil health concept that I think sometimes is underappreciated. We often think of soil health being something that is happening right at the surface, changes in the surface characteristics. But when we have healthier soils, we have the topsoil and the subsoil well connected so that roots move down through, and also air and water is moving through the profile, not just up in the topsoil. There's some excellent data. This is from the University of Maryland. There are other people who have shown this, that when we grow cover crops, we tend to have more cash crop roots following those cover crop roots. When we do that, we often end up with more water available to our cash crop. And particularly when we have a dry season, we end up with higher yield in our cash crop. When we are following a cover crop that created those root channels, we're able to grow more cash crop roots deeper in the soil and utilize more water. We also are changing the microbial ecology of not just the surface, but a deeper volume of soil is being changed when we are growing more roots. Basically, when we have a more microbially active, large volume of soil, we end up with more effective immobilization, so capture of nutrients, but also release of nutrients at the right time. So we're capturing nutrients when they are susceptible to loss, and we're releasing nutrients when the crops need them. All of this is being energized by root carbon, and it's also building shallow and deeper soil organic matter at the same time. Kind of the bottom line that farmers want to know about is, well, how is this impacting their cash crop performance? And I think this is a great example. Farmers that have done long-term cover cropping and normally integrated cover cropping and no-till, they have seen consistent benefits during our most stressful weather conditions. For example, 2012, this is Terry Taylor in Southeast Illinois, where he had the long-term no-till and cover crops. His corn was significantly less stressed than where there was tillage and no cover crop. A key piece of making all of this work is being able to address the extreme weather in a way that responds to the weather effectively. I think this is an example of a company that's helping farmers to do this. The nitrogen pulse approach is an interesting one. They start with measuring the soil organic matter, and they specifically are using the Illinois soil nitrogen test. So they're measuring a component of the total soil organic matter. They're not just measuring it at the surface. They're taking a deeper sample to measure the part of the organic matter that's most likely to release nitrogen. And then they are coupling that measurement with a weather platform, which basically says, okay, we know what the potential for nitrogen release is from the soil test, but is that potential actually being realized, and is there loss going on? And so they're making the Illinois soil nitrogen test much more effective by coupling in the weather piece of this. This is really what farmers need to understand, how they can both improve the soil's ability to release N, but then react to the driver, our weather each season, and understand that each season will be different because of the weather. And this, I think, is a good example of how farmers can couple the soil health testing with a weather platform. So let's try and, I guess, wrap this all up. Our challenge to make cover crops profitable is to figure out how to put the pieces together. And we need to think about this as not just sticking in cover crops as a missing puzzle piece, but understanding which puzzle pieces cover crops fit well with. Obviously, if you have livestock, cover crops easily fit. If you have highly erodible land, it's easier to fit cover crops in. If you want to do corn on corn or fall tillage, I'm not saying it's not possible, but those are more challenging to figure out how to fit the cover crops in. We need to take a strategy that obviously cash crops are our priority, but we need to understand that the way we design our cash cropping program either sets us up for more effective or less effective cover cropping. And so Cameron Mills is an example of this. You can do a search online and hear what Cameron has to say. But the basic idea is when we design our cash crops with the intent of fitting in cover crops, we can make our cover crops more likely to work well for us. If you're just getting started, I think the new cover crop recipes on the Midwest Cover Crop Council website for Illinois, these are kind of the lowest risk formulas. I think these are great opportunities to get started. Farmers that are more experienced with cover crops can go beyond this, but post corn, going to soybean, cereal rye. It's probably your easiest system to make work. And then post soybean, going to corn, use a winter kill cover crop or a combination like oats and radish. And these recipes are just that. They're a recipe. They lay it out in a very simple, straightforward way. If you're just getting started, these are the lowest risk ways to get started. Obviously, we don't want to have prevent plant, but prevent plant is a situation that creates an incredible opportunity for more cover cropping. And so if you have a prevent plant opportunity, I strongly encourage you to think very carefully about how to make the most out of using cover crops in that situation. There is more money than ever available to support cover cropping. This is just showing how EQIP funds have been changing in their allocation. You can see that cover crop piece of the pie getting bigger and bigger. So it's definitely something that is a NRCS priority, and this is great to take advantage of, particularly if you're just getting started with cover crops. Okay, so let's put this all, I guess, wrap this all up with a bow. The key concept here is we've got to address various risks like early nitrogen availability, like disease potential. And while individual farmers are certainly capable of making those decisions by themselves, the reality is that most farmers really benefit from working with service providers. And I think a great opportunity for service providers today is to basically become the service providers that are the go-to people when farmers want to integrate cover crops. They understand how to make that happen effectively on their farms. So great opportunity for both farmers and service providers is to figure out how to work well together around this cover crop issue. Just to wrap everything up now, I want to part with, I guess, one of the shining examples worldwide that I think is worth thinking about. The Nuffield Scholarship Program started over in England back in 1947. It's all about farmers learning from farmers, traveling the world, young farmers learning from older, experienced farmers. And actually last year, they just had their 1,000th scholar travel the world. But what I want to specifically reference is one specific presentation. This was one that I discovered last fall and enjoyed sharing with one of my classes. The key question here is, what is the most effective mechanism for influencing farming systems and farmer attitudes? Is it regulation? Is it education? Is it finances? I strongly recommend you check out this YouTube, but here's the wrap. We need facilitators, not educators. Facilitation is essential to achieve farmer empowerment. Leading practices should be shared and promoted. Research must quantify the benefits of healthy soils in order to win over hearts, minds, and wallets. The basic idea is that the young woman who put together this presentation, she traveled all around the world. She looked at programs that were focused on providing more education to farmers. She looked at programs that were providing more money to farmers. What she found was the most effective approach was when farmer-to-farmer interaction showed the beginning farmers basically what was working effectively on the more experienced farmers' farms. And it resulted in lower cost solutions, more innovative solutions, and it basically took the education piece out of the classroom, where I hope it can be effective, but made it really happen out on the farm fields. And I think that's really what we need to solve these wicked problems of soil health and nutrient loss. We need to recognize that this is the model. Farmer facilitation is really the only way that we're going to solve these incredibly challenging interlocking problems. And with that, I will stop.
Hey, thank you so much, Joel. We appreciate it. There are a couple of things, just a reminder, one of the websites you might want to visit, and Joel mentioned it, roughly speaking, when he was talking about PCM, is precisionconservation.org. That one's operated by the Illinois Corn Growers Association, the Soybean Association, now involved with it. A whole bunch of other folks, including Gary Schnicke here on the Urbana-Champaign campus of the University of Illinois. Just some short answers, Joel, for me, if you could. Crop insurance issues, planting green into cover crops. Are there issues with crop insurance as it's related to cover crops?
That's a great question that I think is basically a question that is evolving. There were issues. I think those issues are being resolved. And rather than get specific, I encourage the individual farmer to talk to their crop insurance agent and also talk to other farmers that have experience planting green. And they will be able to explain what they are hearing from their crop insurance agents. But I think those problems are being resolved. And I really think that obviously the reason why there would be a concern is if planting green adds risk. with the right management, I think planting green actually reduces risk. And so that's the key thing. We have to manage, if we're planting green, we have to manage the cover crop in a way that doesn't just maximize cover crop growth, but also reduces risk to the cash crop. And I think that's being done effectively.
The question, going from soybeans to corn, does wheat have the same effect on tying up the early nitrogen?
Does wheat have the same effect?
Does wheat have the same effect of tying up the early in?
Yeah, I think basically whether we're dealing with dead residues or a living cover crop, when we have a lot more biomass out there that has not been incorporated, we have to add more nitrogen very early in the season to make sure that we've addressed immobilization. It's something that's going to vary, vary from field to field, from season to season, but just consistently getting out extra nitrogen available early in the growing season, we'll be able to address that problem that is likely to occur. And I just see a text saying wheat as a cover crop. I would expect the effect of wheat to be similar to rye, and that we would definitely benefit from putting out that early nitrogen program with a focus on nitrate availability.
He qualified the wheat as the cover. So yeah. Okay. And finally, when the precision cover crop study was skipping rows in the cover crop planting, are the gullies forming down the middle in the wet spring, or was that a no-till planted cover crop?
It was a no-till planted system, is my understanding. There actually are many farmers. If you take a look at the cover crop innovators across the Midwest over the last decade, many of them have tried some type of precision cover cropping. And I think in a situation where you are establishing the cover crop with minimal tillage or no tillage at all, the risk of having erosion down between your cover crop rows is pretty small.
This might take longer than I want. Can you explain the difference between facilitation and education? I have an answer for that one if you don't.
Well, I think since you are eager to answer it, I'm going to hand it right to you. So go ahead, Todd.
Facilitation is simple. Think of ethanol. From once the U.S. government decided the RFS was in place, that was facilitation. It facilitated the development of ethanol. Education is what Extension and Dr. Gruver and the rest of the folks do. So facilitation is something that actually pushes it along in a real and measurable way. Education can do the same thing, but really we're just passing along the knowledge at that point. Dr. Gruver, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate you being here, and you'll be around maybe to answer questions later too, I take it?
I will try to stick around. I have a class at noon, but between now and then I should be on.
All right. Thank you so much. Joel Gruver is from Western Illinois University. You can see more from him. Just search him out. I'm sure you can find his contact information. Now, let's turn our attention to Chad Bell. Chad farms in eastern Mercer County with his dad, Greg, and they grow 1,200 acres of corn, soybeans, and wheat, while also raising hogs. Chad has been using cover crops, mostly cereal rye, on their farm since 2012. He lives with his wife and two children in Viola, and is also active as a board member for the Mercer County Farm Bureau and Gold Star FS. Chad, I think I pronounced Viola correctly, but frankly,
yep, you sure did.
Good. The floor is yours.
All right. Thanks, Todd. And thank you, Joel, for that presentation. I enjoy listening to Joel every chance that I've gotten, and it seems like I'm fairly close to being on track with what Joel has to say. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the experiences that I've had using cover crops and mainly cereal rye, and how I've managed that in corn, soybeans, and wheat on my farm. So A little bit of background, graduated from Illinois State in 2008 and then went to work for Gold Star FS till 2013. Then I've been farming full-time since then, corn, soybeans, wheat, and then we used to have some cattle, so we still have some hay ground. Like to bring the cattle back here at some point, and just like Joel mentioned in his presentation, that cover crops as a forage is a great way to great thing to integrate it back into livestock. So that's what I'm hoping to get to here in fairly soon. So my conservation's been fairly important, or very important there in my farm family history. Like you can see there, my late grandpa was named Mercer County Conservation Farmer of the Year in 1978. So conservation's been important on our farm for many decades. So here's a map of just kind of where I'm located in Illinois, northwestern part of the state. So my experiences using cereal rye also include some management tips, and fill you in on what my current program is for managing rye with corn and soybeans. And I want to preface that when I mention rye, it's short for cereal rye. I'm not talking annual ryegrass, two different crops completely. So when I'm saying rye, always think of cereal rye. And then I'll finish up by giving some economics of using cereal rye for weed control in soybeans. So I've had some pretty good experiences in corn. We farm quite a bit of highly erodible land, being where we're at in the state, and so quickly learned that cereal rye is very good for slowing down or stopping soybean stubble erosion, or even just erosion in general. And when you think about your biggest potential for erosion, it usually comes in that late winter, early spring time frame. And so I've made it more of a priority here the last few years of trying to get the cover crop seeded right behind the combine, so I can maximize the growth that I get in the fall to be ready for that erosion time frame in the spring. Rye that's less than 12 inches or a foot tall usually decays fairly fast. So I'll talk about a little bit more about that here coming up. One of the first things that I also noticed was improved soil tilth. Just that root mass from the cereal rye turned some of that topsoil into almost like potting soil. So it has created a nicer planting environment for corn and soybeans. And I use a 15-inch planter to put in my rye, so I don't have quite the mat, I guess you could say, of residue. I have that 15-inch gap between rows of the rye, so it's a little bit different than drilling or broadcasting as far as coverage, but I think it's still fairly close in comparison to effectiveness on erosion. Learning experiences, you can see by this picture, a little background, that was 2016. Pretty challenging planting spring for planting corn. And you can see that picture was aerial seeded the fall before, and right along the end row, I'm not exactly sure what happened, but I think the airplane probably seeded the end rows and then went back and forth down the length of the field, and maybe doubled up the seeding rate right there at the end rows. And so you can see a pretty thick stand of rye, and that caused some problems with probably seedling disease, carbon penalty. That field in particular has a history of higher residue levels that I'm not exactly sure why it's that way, but there's a lot of things that can compound other problems when you're using cover crops. So I'm not doom and gloom as far as cover crops, but you have to be very cognizant of other issues compounding other issues. Termination timing. What I've learned also that same spring, don't terminate your rye if it's taller than a foot, if your corn isn't planted and the forecast doesn't look like you're going to get that planted within a few days. Because you terminate that rye and you get that week or 2 weeks or whatever that window may be that you're just getting constant rains or stay wet for a while. If that rye has enough time to fully die and start falling over, it could shade the ground, and it does a great job. It does a great job at preventing the soil from warming up and drying out because it's blocking that sunlight and preventing the soil from warming up. So you can have more fun watching paint dry. Armyworm potential. Last year was the first year that I really had any armyworm issues, and I don't think they were quite up to IPM, but I just the way the conditions were at the time, I went ahead and sprayed, but I'm not sure that I would have had to, but wanted to be on the safe side. So here's some of my management tips from what I've learned since 2012 when I first started using cereal rye and corn specifically. Less than 50 pounds of the seeding rate. That aerial picture that I showed a couple slides ago, that was 50 pounds aerial seeded. So if you get really good growing conditions and good timing on seeding the aerial, you can get a pretty full stand, and it can be thick, which can cause problems too. So I like a thinner stand, and it should still give good erosion benefit, but not completely shade the ground. Like I mentioned earlier, I use a 15-inch white planter. So I'm not looking for 100% ground cover. Those roots will branch out, spread out in between the rows. And I did have learned that a couple of years ago when I was digging rye that was about a foot tall, the roots were spanned all the way across that 15-inch row. Terminate either first thing in the spring or less than 8 to 10 to 12 inches, or plant green. I've done both, and it just depends on the spring, and I'm not exactly sure what my future plans are for that, and I'll talk about that more later. But a quarter Roundup by itself will take care of cereal rye easily. A good source of nitrogen at planting, either broadcast with pre-emerge chemicals or planter applied. And that can be either starter fertilizer, furrow. Like Joel mentioned, a good source of nitrogen early is something that's needed. Consider strip till or biostrip till. So Joel showed both of those, strip till and biostrip till, and right now I'm using a strip till program on most of my acres. I do still have some highly erodible land that is just too much to even attempt strip till on. So my current program, 15-inch rows seeded on angle after the combine, or as close as I can, takes additional management and labor, and sometimes the combine has to either stop or slow down to make everything happen, because you can get behind pretty quickly. Strip till fall anhydrous, about 100 units. I plant corn on those strips in the spring. Used heavy duty down pressure springs, row cleaners, and spike closing wheels with drag chains is my kind of my planter setup at the moment. And then I spray the pre-emerge rye burn down all in one pass following the planter. using 40 units of nitrogen, that's 32%, and that's stabilized or protected with agritane to prevent volatilization, and then 5 gallons of ammonium thiosulfate. And I mentioned earlier, 32 ounces of Roundup will take care of rye. That's a standalone spray program, but when you're trying to terminate rye or other weeds as well, with liquid fertilizer plus Roundup, you can antagonize that Roundup. And so even the full rate there at 44 ounces, I've not been able to get 100% kill sometimes, but usually it's 80, 85, 90%, and that's still acceptable to me looking across the field. And then I broadcast 46 units of nitrogen as Super U, which is protected against volatilization, and it's an ammonia inhibitor at around V4 timeframe. Next steps in corn. I changed planters this spring, so I'm going to have hydraulic down pressure. Also considering in-furrow starter on the planter. I've changed some acres here this last fall. Instead of using MAP, I'm using MES for a phosphorus, sulfur, and zinc source. And then also raise pigs, so manure is also a source that I have to use. And this picture in particular is the field that I applied manure on in the fall of 19. So this is the 2020 corn crop in that picture, and you can see a pretty distinct color line there in the middle of the picture, and in the background was didn't receive manure, ran out before I got that part of the field covered, and so that part just received anhydrous. And then that part of the field was my typical program with fall anhydrous and then the spring program. And there, here in the foreground was manure. So you can see pretty significant color differences there. There's probably a couple different reasons. More nutrients applied there. You can see that it almost looks like it's been tilled, which it was not. It was just had the manure applicator through it and then strip till. So there's probably couple different reasons there why that looks different. Also, like I mentioned before, I haven't had big issues terminating the rye green after planting, but I've had some, like I mentioned earlier, some seedling disease, like that one picture that the corn was just stunted pretty hard. But I do believe that transitioning more towards strip till has really minimized some of those effects that I saw before, where I was primarily just straight no-till. Soybeans, it's by far easier to manage than corn, but there's still additional management. Planting green has worked really good for me, and then terminating after planting. It's a pretty good planting environment, and soybeans don't mind the residue. So you have the corn stalk residue from the year before, plus the rye residue, green or dead. A couple years ago, we had a 3-week dry spell shortly after planting, and hot and dry, and that extra residue really held the topsoil moisture through that time. And I'll mention later on that makes for good weed suppression. Learning experiences. This picture was aerial seeded, so I don't remember what the timing was, probably the end of August or first part of September, but had really good moisture following that and got the rye established really fast, and temperatures allowed that rye to really take off. And you can see we were cutting that rye off and running it through the combine. So it can cause some harvest issues. As soon as that dew comes on in the evening, you're stopped real fast. It doesn't, it's just like mowing your yard when the dew's on, you can get some buildup and it's just not something you can do. Select Max, so I've been starting year 3 this spring of growing some non-GMO soybeans. And so in a non-GMO program, if you're wanting to terminate rye right around emergence time of the soybeans, Select Max is your option. And I didn't realize how slow the kill was until it was my main weed killer in that system. So it dies slow and the residue sticks around for a while, so the beans can get shaded and spindly and possibly lodge. And then there's the additional straw running through the combine that can also slow things down a little bit. But overall, even though the beans got a little bit spindly here this past year when I changed my program a little bit, I still had average yields on those fields comparable to the farm average. Here's a picture showing that non-GMO soybean field. June 8th on the left. I can't remember now when I sprayed the Select Max, probably a week or 10 days before that. So right around the 1st of June. And there you can see on the right, June 28th, about a month later, that rye is still standing up straight, and the beans are growing up fine through it, but that did cause some shading early on. And using Roundup seems like the rye tends to fall down quite a bit sooner. Management tips: seeding rate is less important. There's just less issues with interaction between soybeans and cereal rye. But if you want to use it for weed control or erosion, the higher the rate, the better. Spraying residual only in the first thing in the spring is something that I've been doing. Also, I like to plant beans first thing in the spring as well. I got a corn planter and a soybean planter, so as soon as the ground's fit in the spring, I'm going to be out there planting. So that can cause some give or take on maximizing soybean or the rye biomass if you're wanting to plant in April. So that's something to be cognizant of. Narrow row soybeans, I like 15-inch row soybeans. Gives me a little bit earlier canopy and helps with weed control as well. Planting green, my planter setup's just heavy duty down pressure springs, a no-till coulter, and rubber closing wheels. So pretty standard setup for planting soybeans. And then I follow the planter with a quarter Roundup on the Roundup Ready acres. And I own my own sprayer, and it gives me a lot more flexibility on timing, as far as I don't have to worry about calling up the local retailer and timing the spray applications. When you start incorporating cover crops, there's going to be more spraying probably, or potentially more spraying, and it just gives you the flexibility to kind of tweak your programs. So my current program, planting 15-inch rows on an angle like I am with corn. I'm spraying residual first thing in the spring. I'm not burning the rye off. Planting soybeans green into the rye, and then terminating with the quarter Roundup. And then I make a third trip with post residual and Roundup. And my retailer can attest that I have some of the cleanest fields probably in the area. And at this point, I have sprayed some Extend on a couple fields that were new to us, but the fields that we've had been working for extended period of time, I really don't have a need for the extend or enlist program at this point. Not saying I won't in the future, but a successful program for weed control also requires hand pulling and spot spraying field edges and problem areas. That's something I'm pretty adamant about, as far as water hemp is our biggest weed issue. And driving around, you see a lot of the worst pressures probably in the end rows or the field edges. And if you can control a lot of those areas before the middle of the field has higher water hemp pressure, you can do a pretty good job of keeping water hemp from spreading. So next steps, non-GMO soybeans, possibly using a weed wiper attachment for Roundup. Select is pretty expensive compared to Roundup, and obviously when I'm the termination timing of the rye versus the height of the soybeans are pretty small, so unless my boom's in the ground, then I should be able to use a weed wiper attachment and take out that rye with Roundup. That's something that I'm considering for the spring. Roller crimper, that's also a good option for terminating the cereal rye in crop. It's expensive. I priced one last year just to see what one might cost, and it was $45,000 for a 42 foot. Now there's probably better low cost ways of doing that, but that was just for cost reference what I have. Roller crimper takes a much higher seeding rate of rye to work better. It doesn't quite work as well on thinner stands. It's also a little bit different termination mode. It's a mechanical versus a chemical use, so that could provide some soil health benefits there. Cover crops and wheat. I'm just kind of getting started with wheat, really. This is the second crop that I seeded here this last fall, so I'm still trying to figure things out. But really, in our part of the state, your options, if you're following the combine, or basically rye, wheat, or triticale. Rye is probably the most cost-effective one at this point, but if you're able to incorporate wheat, your options are pretty unlimited, and could give you a good opportunity for maximizing your cover crop investment, because you have that additional a couple months there in the summertime and early fall to get better growth, and also diversify your cover crops. So moving on to economics of the weed control part, I'm going to go through some of this pretty fast, but those are my actual costs for pricing out a program. So you can see on the left is just kind of a standard soybean program for Roundup Ready soybeans, or enlist soybeans, I guess. And then on the right is a program for using cover crop cereal rye in a similar program. So you can see there is a cost difference there, but I'm going to go through that here in a second. So overall, those two programs, there was about $8 an acre difference, and I also needed to mention that I included $4 an acre per spray application into those costs. So the one on the left was a 2-pass program. The one on the right was a 3-pass. So those applications costs are included in that. But so there's a $8 an acre difference in those two programs. But like was mentioned earlier, the state of Illinois is now offering a $5 an acre crop insurance discount, which I fully took advantage of the last year and this year. Cargill, who I sell a lot of my grain through, this past year, I just received the check the other day, but they were paying up to $10 an acre for 200 acres of cover crops. And then also mentioned, like in Joel's presentation, a lot of carbon sequestration programs that are being talked about with Indigo Ag and other companies. So you can see you can actually pay for the cover crop seeding and all the additional costs involved with that by if you look into some of these programs. And also that $8 buys you nutrient sequestration, water holding capacity, better biological activity, and also some funny looks from your neighbors and retailers when you're doing things a little bit differently. So here's the non-GMO program, the standard program on the right, incorporating cover crops on the, or standard program left, incorporating cover crops on the right. You can see really near my costs on both of them. And my program that I am thinking about running is on the right-hand side. So really no cost difference because I'm using the cereal rye for weed control, and that's giving me pretty good control for water hemp. So this one's a little bit busy, but on the left, I'm comparing the standard program for just a regular Roundup Ready weed control program versus the non-GMO with cover crop program. So you can see there's about $13 an acre difference in that weed cost, and using putting some economics to that, fall soybeans as of a couple days ago were $11.40. Non-GMO, I'm receiving $1.50 a bushel premium, so I'm generating additional $90 an acre of revenue on assuming 60 bushel soybeans. So with that, taking out the extra weed control cost, I'm still netting $77 more revenue off a non-GMO program. Let's see. Yeah, and I guess that's really about it.
Chad, thank you so much. We appreciate you being with us today. If there are questions, go ahead and put them in the box and we'll get them answered. I do have a question, I think, here. Interested in learning more about carbon programs. Oh, that was just a comment. There is a February 12th forum with a presentation of carbon entities. That's in your chat box there. So if you are looking at that, you can pick up the chat. Otherwise, thank you, Chad. We appreciate it. Thank you, Dr. Gruver, for being with us as well. Chad, you can go ahead and turn your video camera on if you'd like. I shut that off so we can say goodbye to you. Thanks to all the folks that have been with us for the morning. We appreciate that as well. And particularly Ileana Brown, who helped put this together, actually managed to put all of it together. Thank you, Ileana, for doing that. Thank you so much for being with us. By the way, you can catch my radio programming if you'd like at willag.org, willag.org. I'm about to, in the next 2 minutes here, host a webinar for the Farm Doc team. And if you go to farmdocdaily.illinois.edu and look under webinars, you'll find that. And we're going to talk about ARC and PLC decisions today. Those will be up on the website as well. Thanks to everybody who was involved in the process. We do appreciate it. And we'll see you again soon enough.